Zoran Đinđić's early life and intellectual formation. Zoran Đinđić was born on August 1, 1952, in Bosanski Samak, a small town in what is today Bosnia and Herzegovina, but was then part of the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Born into a military family, Đinđić's father was an officer in the Yugoslav People's Army, which deeply influenced the young Zoran's early life. Military service was revered, and Đinđić was introduced to the ideas of discipline, nationalism, and public service at a very young age. His mother, a teacher, instilled in him the importance of education and the pursuit of knowledge, which played a crucial role in shaping his future intellectual path. As a young boy, Đinđić was intellectually curious and showed signs of brilliance. His early education took place under the umbrella of a highly centralized and authoritarian communist system. The ruling party, the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, was firmly entrenched under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, and there was little room for dissent or political diversity. This repressive environment, however, sowed the seeds of Đinđić's later opposition to authoritarianism. Despite growing up in an atmosphere where any opposition to the state was swiftly crushed, Đinđić remained deeply engaged in political ideas. He was fascinated by philosophy, which allowed him to question the authority and legitimacy of the single-party system under which Yugoslavia was governed. As he grew older, his intellectual pursuits became more focused, and by the time he enrolled at the University of Belgrade to study philosophy, he was already positioning himself as a reformist. In the turbulent atmosphere of the 1970s, as Tito's control over Yugoslavia began to weaken, Đinđić became involved in student activism. His political views, which leaned heavily toward democracy and human rights, put him in direct conflict with the Yugoslav government. Đinđić's involvement in student protests, particularly against the rigid communist regime, led to his arrest in 1974 for what was deemed subversive activity. He was imprisoned briefly, an experience that further solidified his opposition to authoritarian rule. Upon his release, Đinđić decided to continue his studies abroad. He fled to Germany, where he was accepted into the prestigious University of Constance. There, he studied under some of Europe's leading intellectuals, including Jürgen Habermas, one of the most prominent philosophers of the Frankfurt School. In Constance, Đinđić immersed himself in democratic theory, political philosophy, and the principles of civil society, which would become the foundation of his later political work. His exposure to Western democracy greatly influenced his vision for Serbia and the Balkans. Return to Yugoslavia and opposition to Slobodan Milošević. When Đinđić returned to Yugoslavia in the early 1980s, the country was on the verge of disintegration. Tito had died in 1980, leaving a political vacuum that various factions within Yugoslavia sought to fill. The delicate ethnic balance that had been maintained through Tito's iron grip was beginning to crumble. As different republics within Yugoslavia clamored for autonomy, nationalist movements gained momentum, particularly in Serbia, the largest and most powerful republic. Đinđić returned to a country increasingly dominated by the rising star of Slobodan Milošević, a Serbian nationalist who had made his political career by appealing to Serbian grievances, both real and perceived. Milošević's rhetoric emphasized the historical victimhood of the Serbs, particularly in relation to Kosovo, where ethnic tensions were reaching a boiling point. Milošević's policies were seen by many as a return to authoritarianism under the guise of nationalism. During this time, Đinđić, alongside other reformist intellectuals, sought to offer a counter-narrative to the growing nationalist sentiment. In 1989, he co-founded the Democratic Party, DS, with other opposition figures, positioning the party as a pro-European, reformist alternative to Milošević's nationalist agenda. Đinđić became the party's president, and under his leadership, the Democratic Party advocated for multi-party democracy, the rule of law, civil rights, and market reforms, an agenda that was deeply at odds with the ethno-nationalist policies of the Milošević regime. Đinđić was an eloquent speaker, known for his ability to articulate complex political ideas in a way that resonated with the public. He campaigned tirelessly for democratic reforms, even as Yugoslavia descended into the chaos of war in the 1990s. The breakup of Yugoslavia was violent and bloody, with wars in Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, and eventually Kosovo. Throughout these years, Đinđić remained a vocal critic of Milošević, whose involvement in the wars had isolated Serbia from the international community and led to severe economic sanctions, opposition leadership, and the fall of Milošević. By the late 1990s, Serbia was in a state of deep crisis. The economy was collapsing under the weight of international sanctions. The wars in Bosnia and Kosovo had left the country diplomatically isolated, and public dissatisfaction with Milosevic's regime was growing. Despite his control over the state apparatus, Milosevic's grip on power was beginning to weaken. In 1999, NATO launched a bombing campaign against Serbia in response to atrocities committed by Serbian forces in Kosovo. The bombing campaign, which lasted for 78 days, devastated the country's infrastructure and brought even more hardship to the Serbian people. Milosevic's failure to protect Serbia from NATO's intervention and his inability to improve the economic situation led to widespread protests. Đinđić, as a leading figure in the opposition, worked to unify the various anti-Milošević forces. Despite ideological differences among the opposition parties, Đinđić recognized the need for unity in order to bring down Milošević. In 2000, Milošević called for presidential elections, confident in his ability to manipulate the results. However, the opposition, now united under the banner of the Democratic Opposition of Serbia, DOS, presented a formidable challenge. When Milošević tried to claim victory in the elections, despite clear evidence that the opposition candidate Vojislav Koštunica had won, the country erupted in protest. On October 5, 2000, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets of Belgrade in what would become known as the Bulldozer Revolution. Protesters stormed the parliament building, and after days of unrest, Milošević was forced to resign. It was a historic moment, marking the end of Milosevic's decade-long rule and the beginning of a new era for Serbia. Prime Ministership, Reform and Resistance. In the wake of Milosevic's fall, Zoran Đinđić was appointed as Serbia's prime minister in January 2001. He inherited a country that was on the brink of economic and political collapse. Serbia was isolated from the international community, its economy was in shambles, and its institutions were deeply corrupt. Organized crime, which had flourished during the chaos of the 1990s, was entrenched in many levels of society, from the police to the judiciary. Despite these immense challenges, Đinđić was determined to reform Serbia. His vision was to modernize the country, integrate it into the European Union, and root out the corruption that had plagued the government under Milošević. His reform agenda was ambitious, focusing on privatizing state-owned industries, attracting foreign investment, and strengthening the rule of law. He also sought to improve relations with the international community, particularly the European Union and the United States, which had imposed sanctions on Serbia during the Milošević era. One of Đinđić's most controversial decisions was his cooperation with the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, ICTY, in The Hague. In June 2001, Đinđić's government extradited Slobodan Milošević to The Hague to face charges of war crimes and genocide. This decision was met with fierce opposition from nationalist factions within Serbia, who viewed it as a betrayal. Đinđić, however, believed that Serbia needed to confront its past in order to move forward. While Đinđić's reforms were praised by the international community, they made him many enemies at home. His efforts to dismantle the power of organized crime, privatize state-owned industries, and extradite war criminals threatened the interests of powerful figures within Serbia's criminal underworld and nationalist circles. Đinđić knew that his life was in danger, and he often spoke of the threats he received from various factions. The assassination. On March 12, 2003, Zoran Đinđić was assassinated as he entered the government building in Belgrade. He was shot by a sniper, Zvezdan Jovanović, a member of the Red Berets, a paramilitary unit with close ties to organized crime. The shot, fired from a distance, hit Đinđić in the heart, and he was pronounced dead shortly after being rushed to the hospital. The assassination was not the act of a lone gunman but the culmination of a broader conspiracy. Investigations revealed that Đinđić's murder had been orchestrated by a coalition of organized crime figures, nationalist paramilitary leaders, and elements of the security services who were threatened by his reformist agenda. At the center of the conspiracy was Milorad Jelmak, also known as Đinđić, the leader of the Red Berets and a key figure in Serbia's criminal underworld. Đinđić and other members of the Red Berets had thrived during the Milošević era, benefiting from their involvement in organized crime, war profiteering, and nationalist paramilitary activities. Đinđić's efforts to weaken their influence and cooperate with international bodies like the ICTY had made him their primary target. The assassination was intended to halt Đinđić's reforms and preserve the power of the criminal networks that had flourished under the previous regime. Aftermath and Operation Sabre. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, the Serbian government declared a state of emergency. The assassination of Đinđić sent shockwaves throughout Serbia and the international community. It was clear that his death was part of a larger conspiracy involving organized crime and nationalist paramilitary groups, and the government responded with a swift and decisive crackdown. The Serbian police launched Operation Sabre, a massive anti-crime operation aimed at dismantling the criminal networks responsible for Đinđić's assassination. Thousands of people were arrested in the operation, including high-ranking members of organized crime syndicates, paramilitary leaders, and corrupt officials within the security services. Milorad Jelmak, the mastermind behind the assassination, was arrested and sentenced to 40 years in prison, along with Zvezdan Jovanović, the sniper who had pulled the trigger. Operation Sabre was one of the largest anti-crime operations in Serbian history, and it had a profound impact on the country's criminal landscape. Many of the criminal networks that had thrived during the chaos of the 1990s were dismantled, and the operation helped to restore a degree of law and order to Serbia. However, the damage done by Đinđić's assassination was immeasurable. Legacy of Zoran Đinđić. Zoran Đinđić's assassination marked a turning point in Serbian history. His death left a void in Serbian politics, and the country struggled to find a leader who could match Đinđić's vision and determination. For many, Đinđić became a symbol of Serbia's struggle to modernize and break free from the legacy of the Milošević era. In the years following his death, Đinđić's legacy has been commemorated through memorials, documentaries, and academic studies. He is remembered as a reformer who fought against corruption, sought to integrate Serbia into the European Union, and worked tirelessly to bring his country into the global community. Despite the immense challenges he faced, Đinđić remained committed to his vision of a democratic and prosperous Serbia. Today, many in Serbia view him as a martyr for democracy, a leader who is willing to risk his life to bring about change. His reforms, though cut short, laid the groundwork for the country's eventual path toward European integration. While his assassination was a tragic blow to Serbia's reform movement, his vision continues to inspire those who seek to build a more just and democratic future for the Balkans. Zoran Đinđić's life and death offer a powerful lens through which to understand the challenges of political reform in post-conflict societies. His assassination was not just the result of individual malice, but the product of deeply entrenched political and criminal forces that sought to maintain their grip on power. Đinđić's story is one of hope, courage, and the often violent resistance faced by those who seek to challenge the status quo. His legacy lives on in the continued efforts to build a democratic and prosperous Serbia, free from the shadows of its troubled past. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into history's most gripping and tragic moments. If you found this story insightful, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, the truth is always worth seeking. See you in the next video.